And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present NDI's Leadership in Democracy Award to the actual Trevor Noah.
Thank you, and good evening. Firstly, thank you, Secretary Albright, for ambushing me at an event in Seattle and telling me that I would be here. I grew up in a country where I was raised, and we were raised by many powerful, amazing women, and Secretary Albright, you would fit right in as an African mother. You really would. So thank you very much for having me here. Hussam, thank you very much for that beautiful portrayal of myself. I think we share a lot in common. I, too, live in a very dangerous place known as the United States. And it really has been quite a journey for me. I'm not going to lie. You know, I grew up in a country where, as many of you know, the apartheid laws restricted freedom of speech. You know, everything from songs that were deemed to be political through to comedy that was expressly political. I didn't have much access to satire. I did not grow up knowing that you could say whatever you wanted about your government. And I was lucky that when I was young, apartheid ended. And you know, I started seeing people saying what they felt. I started seeing people expressing who they were, speaking out about what was happening around them. And the most magical thing I saw them do was they made people laugh while doing it. And laughter for me has always been a powerful tool, because I always believe it is the core essence of who we are. It reminds us of who we are as human beings. You're not afraid when you're laughing. You're no longer in shock when you're laughing. It truly is just you at your core. It's why your laugh sounds as ugly as it does. And I always loved that. I always loved the power of humor. I loved how people could use it to disarm those who would perceive them to be enemies. I loved how people could use it to bring people together towards a common goal. I remember one of the first times I saw comedy being told in an environment where I genuinely did not think it was. I was at a protest with my grandfather, and we're walking through the streets of Johannesburg, and I don't know what the protest was about. I don't know what the people were marching about. All I remember is I was with him in the streets, and there were policemen on horses. And there's something about a policeman on a horse that makes them even scarier than they may already be. And we would never walk close to the horses, and on this occasion, we got particularly close, my grandfather and I. My grandfather's a really boisterous, funny man. And he looked up at the policeman, and the policeman looked down at us, and he said, "Hey, get out of the bloody way, move." And my grandfather stopped. You know, this steely Xhosa man, 70-something, 80-something years old, and he looked up at this policeman, and he said, "Master, can I ask you a question?" And I didn't know anything about the world, but I knew what he had just done could get us killed. You don't speak to a man on a horse. And my grandfather looked at him, and I have to give you a bit of context before I tell you what he said. The previous week in South Africa, we had our version of the Kentucky Derby. Horses run around, and somebody kisses the winning horse. And the person who had kissed the winning horse was the Prime Minister of South Africa. And I will never forget, my grandfather looked up at the policeman, and he said, "Master, I have a question for you. Why is it that your president can kiss a horse, but he won't kiss my sister. And I was like, wow. Scathing and powerful. And I mean, as a child, I was just fascinated. I was like, wow, I mean, I don't even know what just happened here. And the policeman looked at him, and his eyes flared, and his nostrils rounded, and he looked at my grandfather, and he said, what? And I think the confusion and the curiosity got the better of him, because he said, I don't know, why? And my grandfather said, because you haven't seen my sister. And I saw something in that moment that I genuinely never seen before. I saw that policeman laugh. He laughed from his belly in a way that he even didn't expect. He laughed with my grandfather, and I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen a white policeman laughing with a black anybody. And we left, and I remember as a child, I just remember thinking, wow, jokes are cool. You know, you can make people laugh. Jokes are cool. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized how brilliant that whole idea was. I didn't know what my grandfather was doing. I mean, in one fell swoop, in barely a few sentences, he had critiqued the very idea of apartheid South Africa. He had questioned the structure that had held him back for so long. And the manner in which he had done it got his oppressor to laugh with him, and he emerged from it unscathed. And I think it took me years and years of learning comedy and satire and the tools that we use to make people laugh to truly understand what he had done. I mean, I just first thought of it as a joke, and over the years I started to understand how amazing that little moment was. And that stuck with me. That's who I've been my whole life. That's who my family has been our whole lives. We've laughed through the tough times, you know, as a family, as a nation, you know, and we laughed as we celebrated the dawn of a new age in South Africa. I saw comedy come about. I saw black performers on stage for the very first time, performing to white people in South Africa. You know, and I saw for the first time the power that this medium has to unearth truths that people are so scared to speak about. And I was really lucky, and I always think I am lucky, because that birth of comedy in South Africa really sparked something interesting. And maybe it was because South Africa experienced a bloodless revolution, but we immediately had a burgeoning comedy community. We immediately had this beautiful, blossoming comedy industry, you know, that was free to speak our minds. And here we were for the first time, black comedians and white comedians, black audience members, white audience members, Indian, colored, Asian, everyone together in one room telling truths using this medium. And some of those truths were painful. Some of them hit too close to home, but one thing that was always common was it made people laugh. And that was one of the first spaces in South Africa where we genuinely saw people coming together. I never thought of myself as a political comedian. I still don't, per se. And I remember when I moved from South Africa, you know, a friend of mine said to me, so you're going to America now to host the Daily Show? And I said, yeah, you know, I mean, I'm looking forward to the change. You know, I've lived in a country for so long where we have a leader who has completely disregarded all of the norms and practices of what made this nation what it is today, and a leader who has enriched his family through unscrupulous means and continues to diminish everything that we have built this nation upon. And I said, I'm looking forward to a break from that. I'm going to a first world country. And I came to the United States, and Barack Obama was president, and I was like, wow, this is going to be easy. This is sweet. It's not much to talk about, but we'll figure it out. And then 2016 happened, and so did my show. And a lot of people have said to me, they've gone like, Trevor, do you think you'd be hosting the Daily Show if it weren't for Donald Trump? Do you think it would have been? And the honest truth is no. You know, and people go like, so it's good for the Daily Show. I go, no, it's not good for the Daily Show. I don't think any leader who is divisive and abrasive in the manner that Donald Trump is good for comedy. If anything, I think comedy is good for him. You know, I think, and one thing I've always appreciated, especially in America, is the ability to laugh at a leader who does not want to be laughed at is one of the core pillars of freedom. It genuinely is. Because fundamentally, in my opinion, when you can laugh at somebody in power, it reminds them that they, like you, are still a human being who is accountable to other human beings. And once that gets removed, there is no more joke. There is no more laughter. There is no more funny. And so oftentimes I'm very careful, you know, to stay away from the idea that comedy enables the freedom. No, no, no. The freedom enables the comedy. The comedy is a byproduct of that freedom. When you have the comedy, then you know that you have a certain element, you have a certain amount of freedom. And that's something that I appreciate every single day. And so I thank you for allowing me to be in this room with some of the most amazing satirists around the world who work in environments far more hostile than I ever dream of working in. You know, Hussein, who spoke his stories now, and Kechi, I'm a huge fan of yours. I don't know where you are in the room, but I loved watching the show in Nigeria, and I love the stories that the show has told. And so I appreciate this. I will say this before I go, though. One thing I've learned in this age is comedy relies on a few things. One, it relies on freedom, and it also relies on a common understanding and a common agreement on the truth. That's why people laugh, because it's true. And as that truth gets eroded, we've learned that jokes become less funny because people don't know what the truth is, so they don't know what they're laughing at. And we've learned that. We've learned that irony and satire and sarcasm has slowly had to take a backseat, and we've had to become more explicit. And I don't mean to be alarmist as a person. You know, I don't like it when people say, like, oh, America's doomed. I don't know if it's doomed or not. What I do know is there are oftentimes signs that the freedoms you take for granted are in fact being eroded. You know, no dictatorship started overnight. You know, in fact, many of them started as a democracy. And I know many Americans pride themselves oftentimes saying that, well, not here in America. Well, it's not anywhere until it happens. Now, I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm saying you have to be vigilant in making sure it doesn't happen. You know, I remember Barack Obama said before he left, he said to the people, he said, you know, everybody, democracy is something we got to make sure we don't take for granted. You know, and a lot of people didn't listen. They were like, don't worry, Barry, we got you. We went black, we ain't never going back. But we've learned that you can go back. And so I appreciate this. I appreciate the platform. I appreciate living in a beautiful country where I can do what I do. You know, I appreciate Jon Stewart, who started a legacy that has spread all over the world and inspired people to do this in multiple different ways. And I will say to everyone, let us continue. Let us continue to fight for freedoms around the world. Let us continue to uplift those who do not have voices. Let us fight to be progressive. Let us move marginalized voices forward using comedy, using any freedom of speech that we are allowed. But don't ever forget that same democracy that got us freedom is the same democracy that can get you a Donald Trump. So, good night, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me.